on the golden rule, which you'll see is one of my favorite things. The central question of my little talk here is the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, gold or garbage? So, gold or garbage. On the gold side, Jesus, Confucius, and Hillel gave the golden rule as their summary of how to live. So it has pretty decent authorities behind it. On the negative side, the garbage side, not the gold, most academics ignore the rule thinking that it's unclear and full of problems. Gold or garbage? Which do you think I probably will pick? Gold or garbage? Gold. You think so? That's a pretty good guess. Gold or garbage? Let me elaborate the contrast a little bit first. The gold side. Jesus gave the golden rule in the Gospels in a couple of different places. In Matthew's Gospel, it's in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, whatever you want people to do to you, do to them. That is the summary of the law and the prophets, which means the Bible as it existed at that time. Much, much earlier, many centuries earlier, Confucius gave the golden rule as his summary of how to live. Just a little bit before Jesus, I don't know, 30, 40 years maybe, that's a little bit. The Rabbi Hillel was asked by a Gentile to explain the whole religion, the Torah, while the Gentile stood on one foot. So the Gentile says, okay, explain to me your whole thing while I stand on one foot. And Hillel responded with the golden rule. What you don't want people to do to you, don't do to them. That is our whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. And this is sometimes called the Torah on one foot by the Jewish tradition. It's part of a lot of other traditions of the world too. What did we do here? Okay, well, this is, we're just a little ahead of the game here. Okay, so it's part of all the major religions of the world, most of the minor ones too. It's really big with interfaith groups. United Religions International, which is somewhat patterned after United Nations Initiative. It's part of the Parliament of the World's Religions, in which its golden rule is supported by all the religions of the world, or all the ones that were invited. It's also an important principle in people's lives. If you ask professionals about their responsibilities toward others, a lot of the time they will respond with the golden rule. A business person might say, well, I try to treat my customers as I desire that I would be treated. Or a nurse or doctor might say, I try to treat my patients as I hope that I would be treated if I were sick. Barack Obama is a big fan of the golden rule, and he refers to it quite often, actually. And if you're told to imagine yourself as someone who's unemployed and needs health care, well, there's kind of an implicit appeal to the golden rule. It was also a big rule for George W. Bush of a little different persuasion. I think they applied it differently because they had such very different view of the facts. It's a popular principle. About 5 years ago, a television station in England tried to come up with a new version of the Ten Commandments. And they gave lots of surveys to people, which are the most important norms of life. And they surveyed about 50,000 people, and they came up with their 10 commandments, which aren't really so different from those of Moses, actually, except that the first and most popular principle of all of them by far is the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. So it's a popular principle all over the world for centuries and centuries. different cultures and religions. Where it isn't popular is in the academic area. Okay. Most academics ignore the rule thinking that it's unclear and full of problems. If you had a course in ethics from a philosophy department or a course in moral philosophy, moral theology from a theology department, you might not have even heard the rule mentioned. Or if you did, it was probably very briefly. I did my doctoral dissertation on the Golden Rule a long time ago. I did a search a few days ago to see how many other philosophy doctoral dissertations have been written on the Golden Rule. One other one. Okay, not real popular. I did a search for utilitarianism, another ethical theory, at least 40 people. The search engine stopped at 40, so it's probably way beyond 40, maybe 80, maybe 100. And I did a search for Rawls's theory of ethics, too. And again, 40 hits, probably much more than that. It stops at 40. So the Golden Rule gets pretty much ignored by a lot of people in the academic area. And if people ask me what in the academic area, ask me what I'm writing my book on, and I say the Golden Rule, I can see them kind of snickering inside, as if saying, you mean that silly little thing we learned in kindergarten that doesn't really apply to the complex problems of the real world? You mean that silly little thing? You're kidding. They don't actually say that because they're too polite, but in the back of their mind, they're thinking, what are you doing? Now, why do academics think so little of the Golden Rule? Well, because they think it's unclear and full of problems. If you take the Golden Rule, which seems a little on the vague side, treat others as you want to be treated, and try to formulate it a little bit more precisely, it's very apt to lead to problems and absurdities and difficulties. And let me give an example of that. This is one more precise version of the Golden Rule. I call this the literal Golden Rule. This is about the simplest precise formulation that you can think of. There's a lot of different formulations you could give, which are different, and that's an important point. If you want X to do something to you, then do the same thing to X. X is a person. So if you want some person to do something to you, do the same thing to them. Now, this works well a lot of the time. You want Joe to be polite to you, so you should be polite to Joe. And you want others not to steal your things or lie to you or cheat, well, you shouldn't do that to them. It works well if the other persons are in reasonably similar circumstances and if you have good desires about how you want to be treated. But if either of these conditions are lacking, then the Golden Rule will very quickly lead to absurdities. Okay, let me give a couple of examples. Suppose I have a bad appendix. I want my doctor to take my appendix out. Well, if you want Dr. Davis to remove your appendix, then remove her appendix. Not a really good idea. The literal Golden Rule assumes that how you want others to treat you in your situation is how you should treat others in their situation, even if their situation is very different. So it's like a little too simple. Another example, and Maury will resonate with this. I hate broccoli. I really do. It's disgusting to me. It's disgusting. And let's say that Maury, I've got your name right? Okay. She told me before the lecture she likes broccoli. Okay, let's say that I'm a waiter in a restaurant. And I hate broccoli. And Maury comes in. She loves this stuff, right? You want just delicious. I don't know how you could think that. But she orders broccoli. She wants it. Can I serve her broccoli consistent with the Golden Rule? Not the literal version. I don't want her to serve me broccoli, so I shouldn't serve her broccoli. So I would treat other people according to my own preferences, my likes or dislikes. It leads to problems. Another problem occurs if you have flawed desires. Let's say that Maury eats her broccoli, and it's diseased broccoli. You ever have diseased? No. Well, it's a terrible thing. And she gets the dreaded broccoli-itis disease, which causes you to want everyone to hate you. Okay? So Maury wants everyone to hate her. Well, if you want others to hate you, then hate them. So it tells you to hate other people. Not a very good result. The literal golden rule assumes that your desires about how other people are to treat you are good desires. If they're really screwed up desires, like you want people to hate you, it will lead to great, great problems. Let me give another example. Suppose that Electra, I just picked that as kind of a superhero sounding name. Suppose that Electra likes to give people severe electrical shocks. And she does this because she thinks it's very pleasurable. She's wrong. She's totally screwed up on her facts. But she gives people severe electrical shocks, and she wants other people to do it to her. Well, if you want other people to do it to you, then do it to them. I will tell her to do bad things. So, there are some problems with the literal formulation of the golden rule. And so if we go back to our first slide, and not the third one, okay. Is it gold or garbage? Well, the literal formulation is garbage. Okay. Now, maybe it can be formulated better to avoid the problems. And that's what I try to do. It's pretty tricky to do that because there's a lot of objections to the golden rule, a lot of absurdities it leads to. And if, having seen a couple of absurdities, if I gave you a little assignment, come up with 10 more in the next half hour, you wouldn't have any problems in coming up with them. And there's tons of absurdities in the literature. Trying to reformulate the golden rule to avoid these is a bit on the tricky side. The formulation that I support, yes, I think it's gold. Okay, lest there's any doubt. I mean, my shirt should give that away too, right? The golden rule, you know, it's really valuable gold. The formulation that I defend is this one. It's on the shirt even, in case I forget it. Treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. Treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. There's a lot of subtlety behind that, and I will explain that in the next 3 slides. But before getting there, let me try to make it a little bit more intuitive, what it's about. Suppose I'm thinking of doing something to another person. Maybe I'm thinking of hitting a person or whatever. How would I apply the golden rule? How would I see if I satisfied that? I would think, first of all, of what I'm doing to the other person. Get the facts straight. How are my actions going to affect the life of the other person? And then I do some role reversal in my mind. I put myself in the other person's place. And I'd imagine the same act being done to me. And I would ask, am I willing that if I were in that situation, I would be treated that way? If I'm not, and yet I do this to another, then I'm violating the golden rule. What then? I'm inconsistent. There's an inconsistency between my action toward another and my attitude about how I would be treated in the same situation. We often appeal to consistency in different matters. I've had a beard on and off for the last 80 or 90 years. You're supposed to laugh at that. Do you think I'm that old? Yeah, okay. And frequently, I run into people who give these general insults against bearded people. They say, all bearded people are crazy or something like that. And I always try to test their consistency. I say, you say all bearded people are crazy? Did Jesus Christ and Abraham Lincoln have beards? You say, yeah. Were they crazy? No. You contradicted yourself. Your beliefs don't fit together. You've got to change something. Well, that's what I think happens when we violate the golden rule. We treat someone in a given way, and at the same time, we're not willing that we would be treated that way in the same situation. And this formulation puts it a little bit clearer. GR forbids this combination. I do something to another. I'm unwilling that this be done to me in the same situation. So it's about consistency. This means that the golden rule, at least on the formulation I'm giving, doesn't compete with ordinary moral principles, which tell you what to do. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. The golden rule, as I see it, works on a different level. It works on a consistency level. Do your actions fit together with your other attitudes about how you would be treated? So it's not really a competitor to other theories of ethics. It's more like a supplement. My favorite example, real-life example of an application of the golden rule is from President Kennedy. And this is from a speech that he gave on the occasion of the first black enrollment at the University of Alabama. He was talking to the American people about racism, and he was pushing for new civil rights laws, which were eventually passed after his death. And he appeals very nicely to the golden rule. And let's see if this comes out here.
The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. Whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be.
He has kind of a funny accent, doesn't he? Where's he from, do you think? I better be careful, I'll get thrown out of BC. The heart of the question is, are we going to give our fellow Americans equal rights, and are we going to treat them as we want to be treated ourselves? His whole speech, to me, gives a nice example of how to work out the golden rule, how to apply it in actual moral thinking. First of all, get the facts straight. How are your actions affecting the lives of other people? And he talks about that. You know, what are white Americans doing to black Americans? Treating them as second-class citizens, got to sit in the back of the bus. In many places you can't vote, you can't get the better jobs, can't go to the University of Alabama, you can't. A lot of ways they were treated as second-class citizens. So that's the first thing, get the facts straight. And secondly, he proposes some role reversal, some imagination. Imagine that these same things were being done to you because of your race or color. Imagine that. And then he asks the golden rule question, which I would put as, are you willing that if you were in that situation, then you would be treated that way? And evidently, people would not. And so they'd be violating the golden rule. It's a very nice example. Let's move to these, the three slides, which talk about these three kind of subtle things about the golden rule formulation that you got to get right, or it's going to lead to absurdities. The first one is that GR, the golden rule, involves imagining yourself in the other person's place. Again, I'm a waiter who hates broccoli. And what do you think the Jesuit dining room had for lunch today? Are they trying to poison me? Maybe the rector's trying to... It's disgusting even through the plastic wrap. For me. I mean, Maury would like it. Okay. So I'm a waiter who eats broccoli, so I don't want it served to me. If I follow GR, can I serve broccoli to a customer, Maury, who ordered it? Well, on the literal version, you can't. I don't want people to serve me broccoli, therefore I shouldn't serve them broccoli. On this improved version, I would imagine myself in the other person's place, actually liking the stuff, and ordered it, and ask, am I now willing that if I were in the same situation as the other person, which includes liking broccoli, et cetera, then I would be served it. And here there's no problem. Sure, I'm willing that if I were in a situation where I actually liked it and ordered it and so forth, then I would be served it. What do you consider when you consider yourself in the same situation as another person? Well, you could look at that a couple different ways. You could consider all the characteristics of the other person. Height, eye color, liking of broccoli, everything, and just switch them all. Or, in your mind, or you could switch just those relevant to the decision about what act to do. You can do either. and don't care about which one you do. Okay, so that's the first point. You need a similar circumstance clause or same situation clause in the Golden Rule. The second one is much more subtle. Okay, the Golden Rule involves a present attitude toward a hypothetical situation. It isn't what you would desire if you were in different circumstances. Now, you're probably a little confused at that. It's a very tricky distinction. Let me give an example. My example is my nephew, William Gensler. Okay, he's 14 now. He's all grown up. He and his family visited me from Atlanta last weekend. But the example goes back to when he was 2 years old. When he was 2 years old, when he'd visit my dad, he would love to put his finger into electrical sockets. He would just climb up, and of course he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know about electricity. He was just exploring, putting his finger into electrical sockets. And we tried to lure him away, like, don't do it, come here instead, no, don't do that, but no effect. So the only way we could stop him was by kind of dragging him forcefully away, kind of disciplining him. Can we do that consistent with the Golden Rule? Not if you formulate it wrongly. The wrong formulation would ask, if you were in his exact place as a 2-year-old, not knowing about electricity, et cetera, would you want to be disciplined? The answer is no. So you shouldn't discipline him. Which will, that way of misinterpreting the Golden Rule will lead to fried children. This is not a good one. The proper way of asking is this. This is exactly the same question as the previous slide, except you have a different part underlined. Am I now willing that if I were in the same situation, then this be done to me? Am I now willing that if I were a 2-year-old, not knowing about electricity, about to put my finger in electrical sockets, that I be pulled away forcefully and disciplined? Yeah, I'm willing. There's no problem there. So you got to ask it the right way. This is very subtle, and people almost always say it wrong. Even students of mine who've had my course, you just instinctively you want to say it wrong. Let me give another example. And then this is kind of a famous one. It goes back to Immanuel Kant. Let's say Maury, after you can get even with me in the question period. After eating all this broccoli, turns into a criminal. Okay. And she does awful, evil things. She robs, she beats people up, she terrorizes, she's a danger to society. Okay. And I'm the judge. And it's my responsibility to put people like her in jail, to keep the rest of you safe from such a dangerous person. You're not getting angry. Okay. Now let's say that she's real smart and she wants to get out of this, so she says, if you were in my place, you wouldn't want to be sent to jail, right? Yeah, therefore you shouldn't send me to jail. That's not the way to ask it, though. But that's the same way that will lead to fried children. Instead, the proper way, am I now willing, as a judge, I should be able to say, I'm now willing that if I were in the same situation, I commit these crimes, I be put in jail. The judge should be able to say that. I'm now willing that if I commit such crimes, I should be put in jail. Confusing, difficult distinction. Let me give you yet another example, and then I'll give up on this one. Let's say someone's riding their bicycle and gets hit by a car and gets knocked out unconscious. And I see the person. The person has a wallet. I could take the wallet. Okay, how do I apply the Golden Rule? Do I ask, if I were in that situation, how would I desire that about my wallet? Well, I don't know. When you're knocked out, unconscious, what desires do you have? That would be tricky to apply. Rather, I would ask, am I now willing that if I were in the same situation, I was knocked out unconscious by riding my bicycle, etc., then someone steal my wallet? I'd say no. So I hope that helps. It's subtle. This last distinction is also a little subtle. The golden rule forbids an inconsistent action-desire combination. It forbids an inconsistency. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do. If you have a formulation that tells you exactly what to do, it'll lead to bad results if you have bad desires. Satisfying GR consistency doesn't guarantee that your act is right, but just that you're consistent in a given way. My example here is a coal mine owner. And I use this in part because years ago I taught in eastern Pennsylvania. And I heard stories about these coal mine owners of about 150 years ago who would amass huge fortunes while paying their workers almost nothing and subjecting them to very bad working conditions. So let's say that the coal mine owner, he grows rich, and they had big mansions. I heard so many stories about that. I grow rich with my coal mine while paying my workers only $1 a day. And let's say that the owner is ignorant of what $1 a day can buy, and he's willing that he be paid $1 in his worker's place. So you challenge him with the golden rule. Imagine yourself in the place of the workers. You're paid only $1 a day. Are you willing that in that situation you be paid only $1 a day? Well, let's say he says, yeah, $1 a day is a lot. You can live well, feed your family really well with $1 a day. Let's say he's totally wrong. But he's consistent given his skewed view of the facts. And he can do that. He can pay them so little, consistent with the golden rule, because golden rule is about consistency. Consistency isn't everything. Consistency is one way to criticize our moral thinking, but being ignorant or factually misinformed is another way. And here you have to focus more on the factual information. The golden rule, properly speaking, works together with other things. It's sort of a team player. You got to be consistent in terms of the golden rule, yeah, but you got to get your facts straight too. And those are sort of independent criticisms. Maybe you're consistent but don't have your facts straight. Maybe you have your facts straight but you're not consistent. So what do you do to him? Well, you say, let's go to the grocery store. We'll take $1 and see how much you can buy. Not just for you, for food, but for your whole family. And let's say that he then discovers that you can't buy very much. You would really live very poorly if you had only $1 a day. Then let's say he would not be willing, once he understands the facts, to be paid that much in their situation. Then the golden rule is going to apply a little bit better. Let me give another example of Electra again. Electra, you recall, is this superhero who gives people severe electrical shocks because she thinks it's very pleasurable. And does she want to be treated that way? Sure. She doesn't. She's wrong. I mean, she thinks it's very pleasurable. It isn't. But she's consistent with the golden rule. She treats other people that way. She wants to be treated that way herself. But she's consistent just because her view of the facts is so screwed up. So what do you got to do? You got to criticize her view of the facts. Perhaps you say, well, let's try a little electrical shock on you. Okay, it's so pleasurable. Oh, this is not good. And then the golden rule will go a lot better. This reminds me of one of my favorite formulations of the golden rule. I've been doing the last few weeks the golden rule in various religions, world religions. And a lot of them are very interesting. And one of my favorite formulations of the golden rule is from the Yoruba tribe, or people in Africa. And it's very concrete. It says, before you poke a baby bird with a sharp stick, try it on yourself to see how it feels. Very nice one. Okay. So the golden rule is about consistency. And you could be consistent but factually misinformed. I mean, you need a lot of things to make a good moral thinking. Now, why do I think that the golden rule is about consistency? How are you inconsistent if you violate the golden rule? Is it an inconsistency of beliefs? I gave the example of someone who says all bearded people are crazy. but says that Abraham Lincoln was bearded and wasn't crazy. You have an inconsistency of belief. So you say it's raining and not raining. Is it that kind of inconsistency? No. It's an inconsistency in will. What would be an example of an inconsistency of will? Let's say you want to become a doctor. That's your goal. And you believe that to become a doctor, you have to do certain things, like study hard and get good grades. But you don't follow through. You don't act accordingly. Then there's an inconsistency between your goal and your beliefs about how to satisfy it and your actions. And once you realize that, you got to change something. You got to give up your goal of becoming a doctor, or you've got to actually act accordingly, study harder, or something like that. But things don't fit together. Is the golden rule that kind of inconsistency? Well, it's kind of a relative of that. It's not exactly about ends means. Rather, it's about two related kinds of consistency, which I call conscientiousness and impartiality. And basically, the argument here goes, if you're conscientious and impartial, those two kinds of consistency, then you have to follow the golden rule, or you violate one of those two. This is kind of tricky and complicated. If you're real logical, you'll like this. You'll hear it and say, cool, okay. Because it shows how really to derive the golden rule on the basis of other kinds of consistency. If you're not very logical, you'll be very confused. You'll say, what is he talking about? Or something like that. So I'll try to make it as clear as possible and then hope for the best. Okay, this tries to show that if you're conscientious and impartial, and I got to explain what I mean by that, then you won't steal Dietrich's bicycle unless you're willing that your bicycle be stolen in the same situation. Or more generally, you'll follow the golden rule if you're conscientious and impartial. Okay, what do I mean by these? Well, conscientious, I mean you have a harmony between your moral beliefs and your life, your actions, your resolutions about how to live, and so forth. So your life and your moral beliefs are consistent with each other. They're harmonious. By impartial, I mean that you make the same evaluation about the same sort of case, regardless of where you fit in the situation, you or other people. So if you say, it's all right for me to do this, you would also say, well, it'd be all right for anyone else who was in the exact same circumstance to do that. That's what I mean by impartial. And the argument goes, if you're conscientious and impartial, then you won't steal her bicycle unless you're willing that your bicycle be stolen in the same situation. Now, how does this work? Well, if you're conscientious, that is, you have this harmony between your moral beliefs and how you live, you won't steal her bicycle unless you believe this would be all right or permissible action. You wouldn't do it unless you thought it was all right, okay, if you're conscientious. If you're impartial, you won't think that it would be all right for you to steal her bicycle unless you're also willing, believe it would be all right for your bicycle to be stolen under the same circumstances. So impartial means you make the same judgment, same evaluation about the same sort of case, regardless of where you fit into the action. So if it would be all right for this to be done to her, it would be all right for this to be done to you if you were in her exact place. And then conscientious again, if you believe it would be all right for this to be done to you, if you're conscientious, have your life in harmony with your moral beliefs, you would be willing that your bicycle be stolen in the same situation. You say it's all right, you have to be able to say, I'm willing this would be done to me. So you put the whole thing together, if you're conscientious and impartial, you wouldn't steal her bicycle unless you're willing that your bicycle be stolen in the same situation. Or more generally, you won't do something to another unless you're willing that it would be done to you in the same situation. Kind of complicated. This is a hint of a larger theory of consistency, which I've developed elsewhere, and this would take a long, long time to explain. In my one of my logic books, the whole thing is formalized in a system of symbolic logic and put very precisely. And the golden rule is cranked out as a theorem at the end. It's very complicated. It looks very mathematical. Although people in my advanced logic class get it at the end. Okay, so I hope you got that somewhat. If not, we're moving to something simpler. Okay. The next slide gives 3 examples of how to apply the rule to a concrete case. The first example here is the coal mine owner again. Recall that he amasses this huge fortune for himself by paying his workers very little and giving them very bad working conditions. Let's say that miraculously he becomes converted to the golden rule. And he decides that he wants to run his business, his coal mine, on golden rule standards. What would he do? What would he do? Well, I spoke before about what you need to do to apply the golden rule, but basically get the facts, use imagination, et cetera, et cetera. This puts that in a nice 4-step strategy. So this kind of systematizes it. 1, 2, 3, 4. First thing he would need to do is to know the situation. Particularly, he should ask, how would my action, or in this case, the policies of the company, affect other people? You know, I have certain company policies. What impact does this have on the life of my workers, that they make only $1 a day, maybe on the neighbors, their house fills with this black smoke, maybe customers. So we try to understand his policies and how they affect the lives of other people. This is hard. He'd have to do kind of a study of his workers and perhaps talk with them. Okay, we have these company policies. How much food can you buy for your family with $1 a day? You know, he'd have to. These are not the golden rule, as I see it, is not easy to apply. It involves a lot of study of the facts, imagination, appeal to consistency, lots of other things. But no one said life is simple. So then he would apply imagination. He would ask, what would it be like to have this done to me? So he's considers, for example, the workers are treated in a certain way. He would put himself in their place. You know, imagine himself as one of the workers, and what would it be like to live their lives and be affected by his actions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Imagination. And then he would test for consistency. He would ask, am I now willing that if I were in the same situation, then I would be treated that way? Which is the same question as you saw before. And again, if he treats them that way and he's not willing that he would be treated that way in the same situation, then he's violating the golden rule. Act toward others only as you're willing to be treated in the same situation. So, 4 steps. This is a little acronym that I came up with a couple of weeks ago. This is the KITA principle. Knowledge, imagination, test for consistency, action. Kita. Sort of a way of remembering it. Kita, miraculously enough, is an ancient Sanskrit word for wisdom. And it also means think like a god. Is that true, or am I just making it up? I'm just making it up. That sounds good, but it would be nice if it were. I did a web search trying to find if it means something in another language. It would be cool, but if you find one, tell me. So, kita. Okay, so if he becomes converted to the golden rule, wants to run his company business on golden rule standards, he's got to knowledge, know how his actions are going to affect other people, put himself in their place, imagination, ask kind of golden rule questions, and live accordingly. Now, one question about the Bible, the Gospels, is how the golden rule relates to love your neighbor as yourself. In the Gospel, according to Matthew, both of them are said to summarize the Bible, or the law and the prophets. Actually, with the love norm, it's both love norm, love God and love your neighbor, but I'm simplifying this short talk, so we won't talk about love of God. But how do these two principles relate? Treat others as you want to be treated, and love your neighbor as yourself. Do they mean the same thing? And if they don't, can they clash? Can they lead us in different directions? My answer, which I think is a little on the controversial side, we'll see, is that they don't say the same thing, but they complement each other. They're about different aspects of morality. They fit together real nicely. The Golden Rule gives us a procedure for how to live. You know, you get the facts, you apply imagination, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The love your neighbor as yourself, as I see it, is about motivation. If you love your neighbor, you care about your neighbor for your neighbor's own sake. You want good and not harm to your neighbor. And this not because of what you're going to get out of it, but because you care about the neighbor for its own sake. So you seek to do good and not harm to others and do this for their own sake. Okay. So it's kind of motivation. It's not an ethical theory. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, but it's sort of a certain motivation that should guide you in your life. Now, my claim is that these two go together. The Golden Rule and the love norm help each other. How does the love norm help out the Golden Rule? Well, the Golden Rule doesn't say anything about motivation. Let's say he decides to apply the Golden Rule to the running of his company. Why does he want to do that? He could have a lot of different reasons. Maybe his reason is ultimately self-interest. You know, unless I treat these workers better, they're going to get a union, they're going to go on strike, they're going to burn my house down. You know, I'm going to suffer unless I treat them more justly. So maybe it's basically self-interest. Or it could be a lot of other things. The highest motivation, in my opinion, is concern for the other person, for the other person's own sake. In other words, love your neighbor as yourself. So if he does this, treats neighbor as he wants to be treated, applies the Golden Rule, because he cares about other people for their own sake, on my view, that's very high motivation. And the Golden Rule, in order to get this high motivation, it really needs the love norm. Although you could apply it for lower motivation, too. So, how does the love norm need the Golden Rule? Well, let's say that the mine owner becomes converted to love your neighbor as yourself. So he wants to do good to his workers and not harm. What does he do then? It's kind of vague. What does he do? He just sits there and loves them? Or love your neighbor as yourself needs a procedure. And the Golden Rule gives a procedure. First of all, you learn about the workers, their problems, how your actions affect them, put yourself in their place, et cetera, et cetera. So it turns it into a more concrete procedure. Let me give another example. Let's say you want to be a doctor, a pediatrician, takes care of children. And you don't just want to be a doctor, but you want to be a doctor that lives by the Golden Rule. Okay, what do? Well, first thing, understand children and how the actions of doctors affect children. And this would involve knowing the medical stuff about children's diseases, et cetera, but also personal stuff. You know, when a little child comes to you, doctor, what are they feeling? Are they afraid? Are they confused? Are they, you know, what exactly is going on with the child? How would he learn? Observe children, talk with them, maybe talk with other doctors, but knowledge about how your action affects the lives of others. And then he'd try to put himself in the child's place. You know, imagine that you're a child and you're maybe afraid, you see this doctor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, this last picture is a mother and a daughter. And let's say that the mother, I'm getting dry, need a drink. The mother, I should eat that broccoli, I think. Yuck, okay. Let's say that the mother wants to bring up the daughter in accord with the Golden Rule. Okay, what does she do? First of all, knowledge. Again, she's got to try to understand the daughter as well as she can. You know, what makes her happy, what makes her sad, how different actions that the parent can do will affect her life now, later, her future possibilities. Try to understand her as a person as well as possible. That would be the first step. Now, you're probably thinking it's absolutely impossible to understand your teenage daughter. So this is totally unworkable, just won't work. Well, That's a little overstated, though. You can't understand anyone completely. I mean, unless you're God. God can understand the inner heart of everyone completely, including... Why? Is that a screensaver? Yeah, okay. I know what to do now. So in a sense, when we apply the golden rule, try to learn the facts, how our actions influence the lives of others, it's hit and miss. You know, even at best, we're not going to get it perfect. When we try to follow the golden rule, we're trying to live as far as possible from the standpoint of divine wisdom, which we can struggle to aim for, to improve, to be a little bit more like it, but we're always going to fall short, and that's an important thing to realize. You never, just in terms of getting the facts straight, very difficult, and you do as well as you can, and that's it. So she would try to understand the daughter as well as she could, you know, conversation, listening to your daughter, etc., and imagine herself in her place, apply the golden rule question, etc., etc., etc. Okay. The last slide says that GR can be embodied in different frameworks. Now, the golden rule, as I presented so far, is a bare formula, and it's chiseled out in such a way that it hopefully doesn't lead to absurdities, like it doesn't tell you to remove your doctor's appendix. Okay, so it's a formula, and I've said how to apply it in a rational way, the basis of understanding and imagination, things like that. I've said nothing about why we should follow it, or how it would fit into a larger philosophical or religious view, or both. I've been, as far as possible, pretty neutral on that. So I haven't said, we follow this because we're Catholics, or we follow this because it's a self-evident principle. I've been neutral. Why have I been neutral? Because it doesn't matter what justification we give? No, I think it matters. I think it needs a wider context. But the thing is, it can be given a lot of different wider contexts. Historically, the golden rule has been defended by various philosophers for every reason under the sun, and has been part of a whole series of very diverse religions who would explain it, why we should follow it, in a very different way. So, and part of the reason that I want to distinguish these two questions, what does the rule say? How do we formulate it to avoid absurdities? And how to apply it? And then the larger life context, the larger religious or philosophical theory. Part of the reason for separating that is that we live in such a pluralistic world today. People are different religions, different philosophical stances, and so you can't really say very well, we should follow this because blank, we're Christians, or we're Jews, or we're, you know, people are different, or because we have this philosophical framework. So the best you can do, I think, is to give what the political philosopher John Rawls calls an overlapping consensus. In other words, you present a principle and you say, well, you could fit it into your own life, your own religion, your own philosophy in a lot of different ways. And let me help you do that. Okay. When I grew up, let me talk a little bit about multiculturalism. When I grew up in Detroit about 96 years ago, I'm supposed to laugh. You don't laugh much here. Okay, BC students are too serious. Okay, maybe you think I'm 96. Anyway, I grew up in a neighborhood in Detroit. The street was called St. Mary's. The church was called St. Mary's. The school was called St. Mary's. It was about 90% Catholic. In the neighborhood, there were no blacks or Jews. They lived in a different part of town. There was no one with an accent. There were no Buddhists, Hindus, whatever. They lived in a different part of the world. You know, I grew up with people very much like me. And I think most people, if you go way back, were kind of like that. The world is not like that anymore. Or increasingly so, we live in neighborhoods and environments which are very mixed. Different religions, different cultures, different races, different traditions. And I think that in proposing something like the Golden Rule, which is common to humanity, all the different religions have it, And it fits into so many different philosophies. And instead of saying, well, this is the justification, my perspective, you have to show people rather how it fits into a lot of different perspectives. And so Golden Rule can be embedded in different religions. The chapter of the book that I'm almost finished is on the Golden Rule in world religions. And each religion, and it's very common, it's across practically all the religions of the world, but they give it a different context. Very different. It's the same principle, Golden Rule, but a different context. In Christianity, you think of the Golden Rule, you think of love your neighbor as yourself. You think of the example of Christ, who was, for us, a supreme example of love. You think of how God first loved us and how we respond to God's love. God is love. The primordial force behind the world is a loving person, a supreme loving person. And he loves us, and we're called upon to respond in love. And we can't love God unless we love our neighbor. These are all very Christian ideas. Very Christian. And if you look to the place of the Golden Rule in Christianity, you talk about things like that. Let's go to Buddhism. How much of this remains? Pretty much nothing. The Golden Rule is important for them, but on a very different framework. They would talk about karma, about nirvana, about enlightenment, about an inner peace that comes from treating people right. I would talk about compassion. Some of these kind of overlap with Christian too. But it's an entirely different framework. And you go to different religions, yeah, they all accept the Golden Rule, and that the world, Parliament of the World's Religions in 1993, they all hugely voted in favor of a global ethic, which includes the Golden Rule. But their individual stories about the rule would be very different. Similarly, philosophers would defend the Golden Rule in different ways. An intuitionist might say it's just a self-evident, objective moral truth that we ought to treat others as we want to be treated. Or perhaps it's a self-evident, objective moral truth that we ought to be consistent. Maybe that's the fundamental principle of rationality. Objective truth. We ought to be consistent. From that, maybe we can derive the Golden Rule. Okay? That's one approach. I like that. I don't like the other ones here. I like that. And in a different context, that's what I would defend, even though among a lot of people it's not very popular today. Another view, exact opposite, is called emotivism. Ethics is just about your feelings. If you say something is good, it's like saying hurrah. If you say it's bad, it's like saying boo. Just your feelings. That's it. Well, you could accept the Golden Rule on that basis. You could say, well, my feelings accord with the Golden Rule very strongly. I feel that way. Is there an objective truth in the matter? No, objective truth doesn't apply to ethics. Cultural relativists would say that ethics is just based on cultural conventions. You know, different societies have different conventions. That's all ethics is. What good is what is socially approved. I think that's a horrendous theory. However, you could accept the Golden Rule on that basis. You could say, well, following the Golden Rule is socially accepted. Not just in my culture, but in almost all the cultures of the world. So I accept it on that basis. Or supernaturalism. God's will determines the moral order. You could say that. God's will is that we follow the Golden Rule. And that determines what's right or wrong. And that's what I follow. And you could say that just about regardless of what religion you're in, because they all pretty much say that. Except that, well, there's some religions without God, so I got to qualify that. But utilitarianism, we ought to do whatever has the best total consequences. Well, people defend the Golden Rule on that basis. It's a useful principle for people to follow in their lives. It's a rule of how people can cooperate together in society to maximize everyone's good. So you care about the social consequences, useful rule for society, the golden rule. Finally, egoism. Are these all the philosophies that I could think of? No, but 6 is enough. You could go on. Ideal observer theory. You could do. Okay, the egoist cares ultimately only about his or her own interest. Could you follow the golden rule on that basis? Yeah, a lot of people. There are many people historically who have proposed the golden rule purely on the basis of self-interest. If you treat others as you want to be treated yourself, people are going to treat you better, than if you're selfish. And if you're trying to decide whether to be selfish or follow the golden rule, if you decide just to pursue your self-interest, you're probably going to end up miserable. You will have a very bad self-image. You'll be very much apt to be happier if you follow the golden rule instead of something. So the argument goes. Okay, do all of these work? That's a long story. And my goal here is to show that it could be argued for from a lot of different perspectives about what ethics is about. Okay, this is my website on the golden rule. It was. Okay, this is a lot of stuff. This gets more search traffic to my school than anything else other than the name of the school. Okay, so it gets a lot of search traffic, a lot of interesting things if you want to follow the golden rule, a lot of pointers about what to pursue, and even where to buy a golden rule shirt in case you want. Okay, I guess I gotta go back to this one. Okay, so let me end up by going back to the original question. Is the golden rule gold or garbage? Well, I'm arguing that if you understand it in too simple a way, it's garbage. But if you have a more sophisticated understanding, it is really gold. It's a principle common to practically every religion and culture of the world, and it's useful in moral thinking, as I've tried to show through some of these examples. Long live the golden rule. Okay.